Welcome in to BuzzLine, the weekly show about Georgia Tech Yellow Jacket athletics. We're at Buffalo's Cafe in Cumming, where we talk Georgia Tech sports each and every week. I'm John Rawl, joined by Jonathan Leifheit of GoJackets.com. And Jonathan, hello, welcome back to BuzzLine.
Thank you, sir. It's always good to be here. It's good to be back in Cumming and surrounded by the winter wonderland this week.
Yeah, many of you listening and watching BuzzLine are probably enjoying whatever's left of the snow that may be around. A beautiful setting. And even though Georgia Tech didn't get to go to a bowl game, I guess we kind of had a little bit of the taste of what Shreveport or El Paso could look like this time of year.
Well, El Paso probably. Shreveport.
It snowed there.
Yeah.
And did Georgia Tech have the pleasure of ever going to the Boise, Idaho Humanitarian Potato Bowl, whichever one?
It's ironic you should say that, but yes, they have.
Okay.
And the day that occurred turns out to be the day of my wedding. So we did go up there, and it might have actually been more than once, but they defeated Beco.
We, not you.
Yeah.
Tell me you didn't go to the bowl on your wedding day.
No, I did not.
Okay.
Yeah. So
because you're still married.
Yes, I am still married.
And you probably would not have still been married had you gone.
I probably would have never made it married
had
I had gone to that game. So, but that was 2004. I think it's possible they might have gone. Actually, they went twice. They went again in 2007 as well, because that was John Tenuta's one and only game as the interim coach after the firing of Chan Gailey, and Coach Johnson was up there for the bowl game as well.
Well, happy 13th anniversary.
Actually, it'll be 14 that's coming up this year.
Oh, will it? Okay, sorry. I guess my math's off. Well, I guess you know what day that bowl game was.
Yeah, it was January 3rd.
Oh, that game was in January.
Yes, it was.
Okay. All right, well, we'll talk bowls. We'll talk about the ACC. We'll talk some basketball. And more importantly on this week's BuzzLine, we got recruiting information to pass along. We'll be right back. And we're back on BuzzLine from Buffalo's Cafe. We're at 1175 Buford Highway in Cumming. And we want to remind you there are 14 Metro Atlanta locations of Buffalo Cafe. And we encourage you to come to this Buffalo's, which is, again, on Buford Highway. It's just off of Georgia 400, exit 14, right down on the left when you come toward Buford. Check it out, Buffalo's Cafe. Everyone here treats you like family. And we want you to be a part of our family on BuzzLine, where we talk Georgia Tech sports each and every week. I'm John Rawl with Jonathan Leifheit of GoJackets.com, and we've got our winter clothes on as most Georgians enjoyed some winter weather this past couple of days, and the Jackets weren't having to deal with that, unfortunately, in preparation for a bowl game.
No, they were not, and on top of that, not only was the football team off, apparently the basketball team decided to be off a little bit too, because they managed to go up on the road to Wofford, South Carolina, or to Greenville, South Carolina.
Spartanburg.
Okay.
Get your South Carolina map out, sir.
Okay. Well, you GSP is what they call it, Greenville, Spartanburg area. So
it's called actually the Upstate, but that's okay. The airport's called GSP.
Right. That's what I call it. So
Anyway, they went up to a brand new arena that's been built on the Wofford College Terriers campus, named after the Panthers owner, Jerry Richardson, a Wofford alum. And they've got around a 5,500-seat arena there, Richardson Arena, I think is what it's called.
Yep.
And Tech went up there this past week in midweek action. Some people, we talked about it last week, why would Georgia Tech go on the road and play a midweek game against a SoCon opponent? But I guess.
Well, as I mentioned before last week, a lot of this has to do with when it comes to your NCAA tournament resume, road wins, no matter who they're against, are viewed very, very favorably. Of course, the big problem there is that if you go on the road and lose, that's not viewed so favorably as well, and that's exactly what happened at Georgia Tech. Wofford had a player, I think his name was McGee, who just was ridiculous the other night. I think he ended up scoring 36 points on the evening, plus or minus, out of the 63 that they got, including a game winner from about 25 feet with defenders in the vicinity that he nailed with about, 4 or 5 seconds left. No, it was 1.9 seconds left. He hit that shot, and that propelled Wofford to a 63-60 victory over the Jackets. All I can say is tip your hat to that kid, because it's rare that you see such a ridiculous performance out of somebody that they just hit. He had guys in his face. He had guys all draped all over him. Sometimes it was 2, sometimes 3, and everything he threw up still went in the hole, and he just played out of his mind. And that ended up being pretty much the difference. As I mentioned, 63 points, over half of them were scored by one player for Wofford.
Well, as we talk basketball here, I know FCS is only for football, but my goodness, these are 2 losses in recent days that the Jackets have had to FCS football opponents on the hard court.
Yeah, it hasn't been good, and I mean, let's take a look at some of the reasons why. First off, this is a team that they turned over a little bit in the roster, so you've got that to deal with. But then on top of that, Tadrick Jackson spent part of the time out suspended, and then he finally has returned. On top of that, you've got Josh Okogie, who was out suspended as well, but then he also had that injury against Georgia State. He's been out, so 2 of the top scorers have been out. Ben Lammers is also sitting on kind of he rolled his ankle, I think, in practice, and has been playing kind of at, I would say, 60 to 80% plus or minus, and just isn't the Ben Lammers we've gotten used to seeing. So you add all of that up, top 3 players either not there or injured or kind of delayed, and this is a team that's not playing very well in the preseason. And at this point, with these 2 losses, the first one, of course, we're referring to is to Grambling State, which was an awful loss, and now to Wofford.
Literally, you beat yourself in that game.
Oh my gosh, yeah, you literally did, because the last basket that gave them the victory was a tip-in on goal, basically, by the Jackets. And then to go up to Wofford, a team that you should handle pretty easily. Now, granted, Wofford has been a bit of a giant killer, but nonetheless,
they
no
made the
excuse.
tournament a couple of years. I mean, in the last decade, they probably made the NCAA tournament by winning the Southern Conference probably 3 of the 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that this wasn't as bad as the Grambling State loss, because 1, it was on the road, and 2, it was to a much better team than Grambling State. But it's still not a team you need to be losing to, and they did, and it was just absolutely another horrible loss, and that's kind of 2 in a row of the horrible losses.
And then they kind of had to let it sit because of exams on the Institute's campus. They didn't have a game.
Yeah, that is correct. They do not have a game until the 17th, so they will be off until Sunday. Next Sunday they play at 4 p.m. against the Rattlers of Florida A&M, but that means they get to sit and stew on that loss to Wofford for a bit.
And the Rattlers of FAMU made news this week on the football field. I believe they hired a new coach who had a Clemson connection. Willie Simmons, does that sound right?
Willie Simmons was a quarterback for Clemson back in the early 2000s, I believe it was, as a matter of fact. Those of you, let's just throw the Georgia Tech connection in there. Those of you that might have remembered Georgia Tech upsetting, I think, a 3rd-ranked Clemson in the 2000 season. Willie Simmons was actually the starting quarterback in that game. I think that the other Woody Dantzler was injured that week, and so Simmons actually started and was the quarterback of record for that game.
Well, I think I can't confirm this, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. He was the head coach. Simmons was at Texas Southern and is moving on to the Rattlers. So congratulations to that ACC connection there with that hiring there. Maybe we'll talk some more football with the other ACC news as we roll on with this week's show. But when the school has exams going on, Jonathan, and the basketball season is in season, what actually goes on the basketball team?
Not a lot, actually. They do tend to take a break. I think they might do some light workouts, but it is generally, you don't do a lot, and that goes for any sport. This would be true if Tech was in a bowl game. They'd take this week off and let the players get through exams. So the basketball team probably practice some this weekend, but they'll largely be off during the course of the week, and then they'll pick it up again probably either Friday or Saturday, depending on when some of the players' exams end. They might have a light workout or 2 or individual workouts during the course of the week just to help their conditioning a little bit.
And help me out again. I know we've talked about some suspensions starting the season. How are the Jackets done on the basketball court from a injury standpoint?
Well, really the only injuries are the ones we mentioned right now. Josh Okogie is, I believe, actually eligible to play again.
Okay.
But he had that compound break on his hand that occurred against Georgia State. That has been complicated by an infection that has set in on part of that. They're expecting him to be back. I would look, and I'm just looking down the schedule real quick. Possibly we might see him against the Notre Dame game, which is on 12:30. Thereabouts, or it might be the Miami game, but they're saying basically the end of December when that goes. The other injury that the Jackets have on the hardwood has been Ben Lammers. He's played through it and has continued to play, but he has not been 100%. He's been I think he's probably been in the 60 to 80% range, getting a little better now, starting to heal up, but that ankle has clearly been kind of a problem for him in the last few games.
You said he got hurt in practice?
I believe that was right.
And did he play in the Wofford game?
He did. He was not particularly effective, nor was he that effective against Grambling State, but he did play in those games.
All right. Well, he's a big force from a defensive and offensive standpoint when he's out there, just to be able to get rebounds and such.
Well, yeah, and I mean the offense they've really set the offense up to run through Ben. So when he's not out there and able to be as effective, he's not good. He scored 12 points against Wofford and managed to get 7 rebounds. So that was still okay, but when we've seen him play, he typically when he plays against teams like Wofford or Grambling State, you usually see him with a little higher point total and more rebounds. So
yeah.
And that's to his credit that he has set such a standard. He's been that kind of a player for us.
Well, if we rewind to last year, which was Coach Passner's first season at the Institute, from my memory, the preseason, if you want to call it, leading up to conference play was very similar this year. Nothing too extraordinary, not necessarily making a lot of headlines.
Right.
Just kind of going up and down.
Well, I mean, last year the expectations going into the year, Georgia Tech was picked, I believe, either last or second to last going into the season in terms of what they were going to do. So they did not have a particularly really hugely difficult preseason schedule.
Yep.
And they lost, some of the tougher games that they played in that, including, I believe it was Georgia, and I can't remember who else they played of note that was in the preseason. And this year it's kind of held pretty much same true to form, except the difference is they're actually now getting beat by some of the teams they should be beating. So we're actually, I think, in a worse position heading towards the ACC schedule this year than we were last year. Getting Okogie back and getting Lammers healthy is going to be a huge part of how the season plays out. But right now, I already think it's an uphill battle to even think about postseason or certainly the NCAA's, and postseason is going to be very difficult as well.
Well, I asked you the question to set it up. We kind of didn't have basketball front and center on our minds last year around this time, and lo and behold, the first conference game of the year was a home game against the Tar Heels, and they won that game, and all of a sudden people said, whoa, Georgia Tech could be a decent year. And as we know, it turned out to be an above-average year.
The funny part is so that game occurred at the same time that the Gator Bowl was going on. During the second half of the game, everybody was like, hey, because I was sitting there at the game, and everybody's like, hey, the basketball team's winning. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And, from what I understand, for those that were in attendance, it was pretty much a home game for the Tar Heels, because the Jacket fans that are a little more, bigger fans all went to Jacksonville for the game because that's a bowl game. Left pretty much a wide open place for the Tar Heels to fill in, and yet somehow or another they managed to win. And everybody first thought, well, North Carolina just didn't take it seriously. But what it turned out was Georgia Tech was actually that capable, and hopefully we'll see some more of that this year.
Well, we hope so. Again, Coach Passner was the ACC Coach of the Year last year, right?
Correct, he was, and well deserved. Well deserved.
Even though the team didn't make the NCAA tournament, it's the reason I had to double check that, because normally you have an incredible year when you win such an honor, and he had a good year, I guess, because Georgia Tech came out of nowhere and did have a winning season, did go to the NIT.
Correct, and when you're picked to be last or second to last, and basically, I think most folks were looking at the schedule and going, well, if they can pull out 1, 2, or 3 victories, that would be about what we expect. And instead, I think they ended up managing to get, I think they ended up going 8-10 on the year in the ACC. So that was a pretty significant overachieve last year from what was expected. This year, it's not going to be quite. There's a little. The expectations now have risen in accordance with the performance we saw last year.
All right. We'll continue to talk a little basketball as we roll on with this week's show, and then the big news going on with Georgia Tech right now is football recruiting with an early signing day of December 20th. We'll find out from Jonathan how that's going and what availability may still be left with this signing class of 2017/18 now. We'll have all that on the other side of this break. This is BuzzLine from Buffalo's Cafe and Coming. Welcome back to Buffalo's Cafe Coming, and we are talking Georgia Tech sports each and every week here on BuzzLine. I'm John Rawl, joined by GoJackets.com publisher, editor, and czar Jonathan Leifheit. Did I leave anything out?
Probably some choice words from some people, I'm sure.
Okay. Well, if you come to Buffalo's, 27 televisions await you with all the postseason bowls going on, with Georgia Tech unfortunately will not be participating in, and you've got a lot of the NFL excitement winding down. Come into Buffalo's and check out any of the teams that you either love or maybe you have a financial reason to be rooting for or against. Buffalo's Cafe, 27 televisions. They're all clear as a bell HD and all the different games on and the different sports as well. I know sometimes I've got some golf stuff in here and it just gets me excited that we're not too far away from that time in Augusta, Georgia in April.
Yeah, the Masters time is about 4.5 months to go, maybe 5.
Yeah, and I can't wait. Although it seems a lot further away when you have snowstorms in December, mid-December, I guess is what it was, early December, mid-December, as we saw this week. We'll talk about that in a few moments when we switch over to football. But wanting to wrap up any of our basketball stuff, North Carolina, defending national champion.
Yep.
Are they the likely power in the ACC this year?
Yeah, so there's probably a few. Notre Dame's going to be up there. They're ranked. I think they're a top 10 team. Miami's actually ranked number 10. Duke and North Carolina you're probably two top 4 teams. And actually, Duke the other night actually suffered a loss to Boston College.
How could that game have happened? I mean, it was a conference game.
Right. Well, they do occasionally, and given now that you have 18 conference games, sometimes in order to make the schedule work, they had to move one into December. It's happened in the past. They actually had done that at a 16-game schedule for a bit back in I think it was the late 90s, and then they got away from that. They felt like, let's get the non-conference stuff kind of over with, and they got everything moved in. But with 18 games, occasionally you have to make some accommodations in order to get all the games in. And I think this is one of those rare kind of what I'll call early December conference games that you'll see. I would not count on seeing too many of those, but there will be a few.
And as far as you know, are the other so-called power conferences of college basketball, they have about 18 conference games?
I think it varies from conference to conference, but typically 16 or 18 is pretty normal.
And what is the arithmetic behind the scheduling?
Well, the reason for that is what you're trying to do is get as many inter-conference games as you can. In football, we have the issue that you can only have so many games. There's only 8 conference games, which means there are teams that you won't see for 6-year spans.
Right.
Florida State is an example. Anything in the Atlantic except for Clemson, who we see every year. You just don't see them. And so what they tried to do was get a stronger mix for basketball, and they felt like also that you could also, given you're allowed 30 games, you could drop from a 14-game non-conference to a 12-game and not impact it too much. So they did that in order to give more interconference play, get more cross, or there is no divisions in basketball, but to get more teams playing that normally aren't on the permanent schedule, as it were.
Well, there's 15 ACC teams, correct?
There are 15 ACC teams.
And so there's 14 ACC games you definitely play every opponent. So that means there's 4 teams you play twice.
Correct.
Is there any rhyme or reason to that?
They're actually, I believe that kind of rotates. You do have a permanent opponent. For example, Georgia Tech's is Notre Dame.
Really?
So we'll see them. We will see them. Yes, we will see them twice this year, and then I believe they will go. I have to go look at the schedule, but then they'll rotate from year to year who the other kind of permanent opponents are for the other three.
Oh, so that permanent opponent for Tech basketball with Notre Dame may change.
No, it will not.
Okay.
From year to year, we'll always play Notre Dame twice, but the other three will rotate.
Okay. Was that a mutual thing, in your opinion?
Between us and Notre Dame,
Yeah.
or well, no, I don't know that there were. I think that they had to pick, a team that you would want to see every year, and I don't think, Georgia Tech and Notre Dame have a pretty good history of playing each other, particularly in football, but to some extent in basketball as well. And I felt like it made a pretty good sense to kind of pick them and patch them and Georgia Tech up on the gridiron.
In football, of course, it's Clemson. So
Yep.
Who is Clemson playing? Do you know?
Their permanent opponent?
Uh-huh.
I have no idea, actually.
Okay. Well, just because of the distance, you would have thought maybe that those two teams were
Georgia Tech does play Clemson twice this year, though.
Oh, do they?
Yes.
Okay. All right. We'll get ready for a refurbished Little John Coliseum. If you head up there for that, I saw that for a football game this year. They have
as we refer to that as a tiny toilet, yes.
They do put some effort into their basketball team. I guess Coach Brownell, believe it or not, I think he's in his 10th season up there.
Yeah, I mean, and they've had mixed results with him. He's done okay, but I wouldn't say he's certainly hasn't set the world on fire up there. He's had, but that's kind of par for the course in basketball with Clemson. They've had some good coaches up there. We mentioned last week Cliff Ellis did a great job kind of in the 80s through the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Rick Barnes had a nice run there. And then they've kind of been had Oliver Purnell, who I think was just kind of mediocre, and now they've got I just lost his name in my head, but Brunell. Thank you.
Right. All right. Well, basketball-wise, if you're wanting to make your plans as we get harassed here by a Georgia fan. Speaking of Georgia, the Bulldogs are on the basketball schedule coming up. I think it's December 19th in Athens.
That is correct. It'll be December 19th at 9 p.m. in Athens.
At Stegman Coliseum.
The barn.
And I had a chance to meet their sweater guy. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I have no idea.
They have a fan that wears this awful sweater, but he goes to every single Georgia basketball game and has for 35 years. Poor fella, huh?
That's a lot of suffering right there.
But they do have at least one dedicated basketball fan. That game is 19th at the Stegman Coliseum in the Classic City. And then the fun starts ACC play on December 30th with that opponent we were just mentioning, Notre Dame, up at Purcell Pavilion on the campus of Notre Dame. And then the home ACC schedule begins with the Miami Hurricanes on January 3rd with a game at McCamish, 9 p.m. tip. That game will be on Regional Sports Network, so I guess It could be on Fox.
Yep.
So basketball is here, and I do see that we were talking about how when the ACC play starts, you would think they would be done with other opponents, but they're not. They're going to have the Yale Bulldogs in for a game in between Miami and a home game against Notre Dame. So kind of crazy how all this scheduling stuff works.
It's interesting. We have two games against Notre Dame, and they're playing them both within 11 days, 12 days of each other.
Yeah.
So weird.
I guess there's some computer that goes through and factors all kind of things.
Yeah, I think what they do is they give them the non-conference games that they'd like to do during the course of the year, because there usually are one or two, because with 15 teams you can't all play each other every weekend, so they'll have to figure out a way to kind of stagger that, and then they kind of spread the whole thing out, and you have to have an even mix of weekend home games and weekend away games, as well as midweek home games and midweek away games. So there's this whole big deal that has to go
smaller
through.
Conferences like the Southern Conference, they factor in bus trips for every opponent. So they sometimes do get schedules where they play a Thursday somewhere and then they play a Saturday game, and it's kind of the same trip. They're kind of in the same geographic area. With the ACC, of course, having plenty of money and teams spread all over the place, do the Jackets even bust any games?
Clemson.
That's the only one?
Clemson would be the only one within conference that they would bust to. Everything else is a flight.
So it's just kind of the standard fly up there, I guess, the day before, get a hotel,
Correct.
And then fly back after?
Usually it's the night. Yeah, usually after the game.
Okay.
Yep.
See, we got all these things taken care of. We're your one-stop shop for jacket information on BuzzLine. We'll come back. We'll switch over to football And we'll start the fun out with football, actually going back into yesteryear since we had snow here in the Peach State this week. We'll talk about maybe the last time snow affected Georgia Tech football and what kind of incredible performance we saw that day. So we'll have that. Plus, Jonathan's got his recruiting information that he's going to send our way. So it's a white Christmas come early for all of you Jacket fans. The white Christmas and the gold of Georgia Tech. We'll be right back on BuzzLine. We're back at Buffalo's Cafe in Cumming. Buffaloes.com is the website. You can actually place orders for pickup, and Buffalo's here at Buffalo's Cafe Cumming has delivery options for you. So if you can't make it out in person, a great way to catch up with the food that you love at Buffalo's. The number here in Cumming is 404-542-7423. Give them a call. Buffalo's Cafe, where everyone is family. John Rawl with Jonathan Leifheit of GoJackets.com. We're talking Georgia Tech sports, and we talked about it at the beginning of the show. We had a white snow fiesta on the ground here this week in early December 2017. I don't know about you, Jonathan, kind of put me in the Christmas spirit.
Yeah, it did. It was kind of nice. It's a rare December snowfall, and it definitely kind of puts you in that mood for that. And we also, my wife and I, made us a nice big batch of chili on Friday night, so which was just perfectly awesome to do that. And then kind of enjoyed Saturday in, didn't go anywhere, and then today we finally got out and got some things taken care of.
Jonathan's plantation near Atlanta had about 10 inches.
Yeah, we got about 10 inches.
You're a plantation growing snow, evidently.
Yes, apparently so. My three-quarter acre plantation that I have. Yes.
And anyway, he had to dig his way out to get here this week. So thank you for the effort.
Yes, no problem.
But the snow, because Georgia Tech's not going to a bowl, I'm glad it happened because many of us have kind of a bah humbug approach to football right now with the bowls going on, and some teams possibly playing for a national championship, and that makes you feel like Ebenezer Scrooge.
Yeah, pretty much.
But I had to think, well, let's put a positive on it. Snow and Georgia Tech. So I put it in the computer, and out pops, from what I can tell and what you told me, the last time these two got together, that would be snow and Georgia Tech happened way out in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Yeah, my memories of Georgia Tech only go back to about 1984. And I don't recall playing any games in the snow other than the ones that we mentioned in Boise for the Humanitarian Bowl in 2004.
I know it's snow, but was it like all over the place?
No, it was not. It was actually the fields were pretty clear. There was not snow going on during the course of the game, so it really wasn't. It wasn't a snowy game. It was snow in the area. But the only other game that I have kind of in the last 40 years that I'm aware of is 1978. Eddie Lee Ivory went out west to take on, and the rest of the Jackets went out west to take on the Air Force Falcons. And this would have been in a kind of I think it was a November time frame. And they were just getting snowed on. And on top of that, Eddie Lee Ivory was suffering from the flu.
Really?
And every time he went back to the sideline, he was basically puking his guts out, and then he'd go back in there and run some more. So he ended up running, I think it was 26 carries for 356 yards, which if you do the math, that was between 13 and 14 yards per carry. So not only was he in the snow, not only was he sick, but he was really, really effective doing that. So it was a very cold day. I think it was about 21 degrees, and they were getting just pounded with snow as well.
So that was the leading game for any Georgia Tech rusher in history. Is that right?
That is correct. And for, I think, about 20 years or so, I believe it was actually I take that back, it's about 15 years, that was the record in the NCAA. I believe it was Anthony Thompson of Indiana who finally broke that, and he ran for, I think, 409 yards against a team at some point. So he actually, that record stood for a pretty good while
Eddie Lee Ivory, the pride of Thompson, Georgia. And we had a chance to interview him many years ago here on BuzzLine. We encourage you to go to the archives and listen to that interview. Just go to our gtbuzzline.libsyn.com page, gtbuzzline.libsyn.com, and search for the Eddie Lee Ivory interview, and you'll enjoy hearing Mr. Ivory talk about his time in Atlanta playing for the Jackets, how he chose the Jackets over that other team that was located in Athens, Georgia. And just a fun interview that we did several years ago. Eddie Lee Ivory, a Georgia Tech great, and he still comes around the flats, right?
From time to time. He was there for a bit, and then I think he's moved on to do some other things as well. So from that perspective, his son actually his son actually played for a brief period under I believe it was Gailey in the early 2000s. But he did not stick around as well. So, but Eddie Lee was part of the Flats, and it was good to see him back there for a bit. And I believe he's, I think he's back in Thompson, or at least he was for a bit out there working on some.
Our
things.
Thompson insider is not here this week, so we'll have to.
Yeah, we'll have to give him a hard time too.
Find out what's going on.
And by the way,
in McDuffie County,
for what it's worth, I was wrong on the current record holder. It was LaDainian Tomlinson, who now holds the record for 406 yards. When TCU he was played for TCU, and also some other interesting things. Bill Parcells was actually the coach of Air Force when that happened, and then he was actually, I believe, replaced by Ken Hatfield later on.
And Ken Hatfield one day coached the Clemson Tigers.
He went on to Arkansas, and then ultimately back at Clemson.
I think he was succeeded by Tommy West.
Correct. He succeeded. He succeeded Danny Ford,
right.
And then he was not a very popular coach there at Clemson. And then Tommy West was his successor.
Right. So Ken Hatfield, I had forgotten that he had a stint there in Colorado Springs, and they were a really good football team back then.
Yeah, and I'll note that when we talk about if you want to talk about some kind of Georgia Tech, how this relates to Georgia Tech. Ken Hatfield was kind of the inventor of the flexbone kind of formation that Coach Johnson uses now. They took the wishbone that you had that Oklahoma and others ran, and he flexed those the two wing backs that you had forward into the formation, and he was the first one to do that. So Hatfield definitely there's some legacy and impact that he has kind of on what we see at Georgia Tech today.
And you hate him, right?
Who, Hatfield?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
Well, because of your lineage, you have the Hatfield and McCoy feud, and you are kin to the McCoys, right?
Yeah, but I don't really care.
Okay. I just did, I'm afraid to bring his name up. I know there might be bloodshed here.
Yeah, well,
After 100 and whatever years it's been since the Hatfield McCoy.
They've officially made up and kissed.
Oh, have they? I didn't realize
they had a whole.
Well, people in Eastern Kentucky do that kind of stuff anyway, don't they?
Yeah.
Sorry if you're listening.
Yeah, go ahead.
But we catch grief down here because of movies like Deliverance being filmed in North Georgia.
Right.
And most people think that's a common thing.
Right.
But, all right, so we're talking football there with Eddie Lee Ivory, and a great Georgia Tech player of yesteryear, and the fact that the snow and all of that. I'm assuming there were some really good visuals coming from the Georgia Tech campus this past weekend.
There were a few. They didn't get as much snow as we did up in the East Cobb confines, but they did get a decent amount of snow as well. And I saw some interesting pictures. Some folks sent drones up. There was actually a good story. Some folks sent a drone up to take a picture of Bobby Dodd Stadium. They got a couple of good pictures, and then a hawk appeared out of nowhere, hit the drone, and knocked it completely out, and that was the end of the drone.
An Atlanta hawk?
Well, not an Atlanta hawk, but a hawk in Atlanta,
okay.
Yes.
All right, nature talk here on BuzzLine. We'll come back, and we're going to get into recruiting and find out what's going on with that, as the early signing day is just days away now. We'll have information on that. And then if you want to talk about Hawks and the Hatfield and McCoys, we've got a little bit of everything on this week's show. I'm going to tell you about a crazy pair of dreams that I had, and they were both related to Georgia Tech. And I think they were dreams. One could actually be considered a nightmare. We'll get your thoughts on it. Put a little psychoanalysis on this week's BuzzLine. We'll be right back.
Do I have to play Freud this week?
Yeah, you do. We're back on BuzzLine from Buffalo's Cafe in Cumming, and we want to remind you that Bash Night happens here at Buffalo's All-You-Can-Eat Wings every Monday and Wednesday for only $14.99. So if you're in the mood for some good chicken wings, come on out to Buffalo's for Bash Night. All-you-can-eat, $14.99 per person. An incredible option there for you. John Rawl with Jonathan Leifheit of GoJackets.com. And what better way to enjoy recruiting as it's going on right now than mixing it in with some great chicken wings. And, Jonathan, what kind of all-you-can-eat players are we looking at here? The top level make you happy, pig out players.
All right, so let's first start out with a little bit of bad news.
Oh, come on.
But it has to do with recruiting in an indirect way. So quarterback Jay Jones, who was a redshirt freshman this past year, appeared in, I believe, one game. I can't remember if it was Pitt or North Carolina, but did appear in one game, has decided to transfer out. He was sitting probably in the 4 spot on the depth chart. Very exciting player, very quick. Unfortunately, he hasn't had an impact on the field at this point, but anytime you lose a player that young that has the athleticism that he has, that's never a good thing. So unfortunately, he has decided to move on. So that opens up one more scholarship for a player that we're looking at. So
you didn't see this coming?
We had a good reason to believe he would, given that he was 4th on the depth chart, and that you had you had players that were kind of younger than him,
okay,
or the same age as him that were ahead of him. It's not a huge surprise, but a disappointment nonetheless.
All right. So that opens up one that was not expected, but now it happens. So how many? Go ahead.
So we currently have 21 openings, and as of last week's show, we had 16 commits. And the good news is we made it 17 this week. We had a player, and you're going to love this name, Seborius Flemister.
Seborius Flemister.
Yes. From Pike County, Georgia, Zebulon, Georgia, has committed to the Jackets. He was formerly committed to Georgia Southern. The coaching staff had taken a look at him previously and really liked him, but they were kind of considered themselves to be full at the in terms of running backs. With Jay Jones deciding to go, that opened up another slot, and they decided to take kind of a best available. They really liked the kid. 1,777 yards. For those of you who saw the high school playoffs, Peach County, I believe, was robbed in their high school championship the other week, this past weekend. But they were one of the top 2 teams in the state, and Seborius ran all over them. I think he ran well over 100 yards against them. So did some good things against good competition. Ran for, like I said, almost 1,800 yards on the season, ran for over 4,000 yards in his career. Really good player, and the coaching staff felt like if he would commit, he was a player they couldn't pass up. So they added him this past week.
And if you're keeping score at home, Seborius Flemister, his name is
apostrophe
Borius Flemister, Flemister. And I'll be honest, Jonathan, I've lived a long time. I've never seen somebody with the first name of Seborius nor the last name Flemister.
I can't say that I've ever seen either one of those as well. Flemister, I can probably see. I've seen some variations on that one that might be close to that, but kind of with Flemish and some other things like that. But Flemister is a new one for me.
And there's some other names that are kind of interesting on the commit list. Harrison Jump,
offensive tackle. He's committed 6'5", 260. He's a good one. If you want some another good name.
Well, I see where we don't have Matthew and Mark, but we've got Luke and John. We got Luke Johns.
Johns, yes. Really, he kind of came out of nowhere at the summer camp and posted some really impressive numbers. And in terms of his speed, he'll come in as kind of a defensive end, and they've got him kind of he'll be about 6'5", 245 kind of coming in. So he's got I think he's really well built for kind of the defensive end position.
So who is you have the website GoJackets.com, which is an incredible website for Tech fans to go and look at all kinds of Georgia Tech information. But recruiting is the thing that y'all do that nobody else even comes close to. Who are some of your subscribers the most excited about?
Well, I think one player that they should be the most excited about is probably the most highly rated player in the class right now, and that's TK Jamedsta.
Okay.
He is out of IMG Academy down in Bradenton, Florida. He is a 4-star defensive tackle, and that's a position that Georgia Tech has traditionally needed more and more players. That we haven't done a good job in recent years of getting highly rated defensive tackles. So that's one player I think folks should be really, really, really excited about as well.
All right. So that's all going on. And so what kind of wiggle room is there right now?
So with 17 commits and 21 openings, there's still 4 kind of left. So you'll see probably an offensive lineman. I think we'll probably see kind of a defensive, probably a defensive lineman of some sort, defensive tackle preferably. Well, that one's kind of up in the air. A cornerback, a quarterback, and probably maybe an athlete. So more than likely, that I just named off 5 positions, but I think in order you'll see kind of the offensive line is number 1, another quarterback is number 2, the cornerback will be number 3, and then the kind of either a defensive lineman or an athlete will be kind of that 4th spot.
And we want to remind people the rules changed this year. This is the first year ever that they've had a December 20th early signing date.
Yep.
So my question to you, Jonathan, is with this new change, have you seen or heard from the coaches or whoever about a dramatic shift in the way they do things this year?
Well, I mean, the big thing will be kind of going into January is they'll be able to focus on unsigned players that they in the past it's been more a case of we got to babysit and hope that somebody doesn't try and poach players going down the stretch. This year, they've got the players. They're all taking their official visits. They'll be signed, sealed, and delivered before Christmas. In January, they can kind of focus more on the unsigned players. And when at Georgia Tech's case, I would expect 15 or 16, probably 16 out of the 17 commits to sign in December. That's 16 players that you don't have to worry about, and you can focus on the remaining openings.
And waste time and money going to kiss up to them.
Right. Exactly.
So it actually may end up being a great thing.
Yeah, I think it will be. I think it helps a good bit. I'd love to see that signing period kind of move back even further, maybe into an August signing period, and that would help a good bit, and that would kind of stretch it out. Right now, if you look at, let's just say, basketball and some of the other sports like baseball and whatnot, they have 2 signing periods. One of them is in November, which is more or less before the season starts, before their senior season would start, and then the other one is in the April-May time frame, which would be afterwards. And I'd love to see something similar where they opened it up August and then had that traditional February period as well.
All right. Just give us a little bit of a sample, if you can, about what's going on with the other ACC programs and opponents and rivals and all that with the recruiting for.
Well, I mean, if you look, Clemson is stacking them up as well.
Are they number 1 on Scout?
Yeah, I don't know if they're number 1 on Scout, but they're one of the top in the ACC. Them and Miami. Florida State is going to be interesting to see what happens. They just, of course, Jimbo Fisher took off to Texas A&M, which means that they're now facing a coaching change, and I wouldn't be surprised to see some of their guys get poached, or a lot of their guys linger on into February to kind of make sure to confirm that that's what they want to do, which again is open them up to that. We talked about poaching players, kind of heading into February. They're going to be vulnerable to that. Willie Taggart is their new head coach out of Oregon, but he recruits Florida pretty strong.
He's a native of Florida, so
he is, and he did a fantastic job down at South Florida building that program, the Bulls, into a kind of a top 25 program. So. He'll be formidable, but the question will be how vulnerable will he be this year in terms of recruiting. So Florida State's going to be one to be interesting to watch kind of heading down the stretch.
And who's the team in the ACC that Georgia Tech seems to butt heads the most with for the same kind of talent?
Well, I mean, I don't know that there's any one team that they do, but some of the teams you'll see in year to year, it kind of varies a little bit, but we've seen NC State has been one. I've seen Notre Dame has been another team that we've kind of butted heads with. Those two are, we've had some. There's actually a few years back there was a couple at Duke that went back and forth there. Okay. Occasionally Clemson, but not very often. We don't seem to go too much with them. But those would be the ones that that I would see. North Carolina as well is another one that we will occasionally see some.
And because of the similar offenses and the fact that he's I think he's from Georgia and certainly coached in Georgia, Army, are they a problem?
No.
Okay.
They're not. Typically, the players that will go to Army, it's just a different level of play. It's kind of moving from that, I'll call it the G5 schools, which I would put Army in that kind of category, up to a P5, Power 5 school. You don't see too much overlap. Occasionally you'll see you might poach somebody from down there.
Yeah.
On top of that, the guys that are going to go to Army are, typically that's what they're looking for is a military career, and so there's not a lot of competition there.
Okay. Well, I know Coach Bunkin was at Georgia Southern and Army. Congratulations, they beat Navy for the second consecutive year, won the Commanders-in-Chief Cup.
Yeah, I think that's the
trophy.
first time in 20-plus years at least.
So,
congratulations to them. And yeah, it was interesting, and we probably could talk a little bit about both. Of course, both Ken Nubitalolo and Munkin both are out of the Coach Johnson coaching tree. And I found it rather amusing to watch the offenses that they ran, which was basically because I think largely this is because of the weather. It just seemed to me like what they did is they ran a version of the Wildcat offense, and that's all they did. I saw one pitch on the day from Army, and I'm not sure that I saw one or didn't see one out of Navy. And so I'm not sure how much that was weather related, but those offenses were really, really basic. And I'm not sure that I would want to see us running that variation of the offense.
Well, going back to some of the weather-related things going on this past weekend, we'll call timeout, come back for our final segment, and Sigmund Freud's going to join us for some analysis of my dreams, and they're white and gold related. So we'll be right back with the conclusion of this week's BuzzLine. All right, we're back for the final segment of this week's BuzzLine from Buffalo's Cafe and Coming. John Rawl with Jonathan Leifheit, likely our final segment together for the year. And so had a great time with you here. If that ends up being the case with your work travel and my travel, we may not be able to do our final show next week here at Buffalo's Cafe together. But want to talk about something crazy that happened to me. I was not drunk, so don't hold that against me. But I had two dreams last night, actually. And they both were Georgia Tech related.
Well, that's a good start.
One could have been more of the nightmare variety. I was riding with a friend of mine. He wanted to see Bobby Dodge Stadium, so he decided to take his truck up to the top level of the stadium. And somehow or another, we started falling. But I didn't die in the dream.
Did you wake up? Because whenever you start falling, you always wake up in a dream.
Well, I didn't crash. I don't know what happened, but I just remember walking, and I saw it was breakfast time, and several of the players were having like a little prayer deal with someone. And then a lot of the staffers were like escorting me off like I might be in trouble. So that was that dream.
Well, that was probably a smart move on their part.
Okay. But I never saw Paul Johnson. And then the other dream, about an hour later when I went back to sleep, I was kind of scared on that first one, to be honest with you. The second dream, you'll like this one. I had a dream I was the band director of the Georgia Tech band.
Oh, God.
But I wore the uniform for some crazy reason. So explain that one. Analyze that one, sir.
So you wore the uniform.
The white uniform of the band. But I wasn't in the band. I was the what is it called? I mean, I was a professional. I was the director.
Yeah, sure you are.
Okay. But nobody listened to me. I didn't give instructions or anything. So that's just kind of crazy. Those are my first Georgia Tech dreams.
Have you ever been a musician in your life at all?
Yes, but never on a collegiate level, and so it's just kind of crazy. And like I said,
it's some latent kind of
I don't know. I'm just
musical fantasies that you've had.
I don't know.
That's
what you're smarter than me. I'm hoping you could help me out here.
Well, I'm an engineer, not a psychologist.
Tell me about your Georgia Tech dreams that are at least able to air on television and radio.
The one that I have is probably the one that most Tech alums have, and that is I wake up. I don't wake up. I realize
you don't wake up.
Yeah, that's part of the problem. is that I have the dream where I realize that there's a class that I meant to drop in the middle of the semester at drop day. I didn't drop it, and I haven't been attending it at all, and I have to go take the exam for this class that I'm going to fail because I forgot to drop the class.
Oh, that's academic related, though.
Yeah, so that's
no Georgia Tech sports dreams.
No, not really.
Oh man, come on.
No, I just have the one nightmare of not forgetting to drop the class, and that's the one that gets me.
I have those going back to high school, kind of like the one class that I needed to go on to college, and I didn't. There's one other one that I've had, and that is that I went through and got all the proof for graduation, and just before graduation they came back to me and said, well, you didn't take this class, you can't graduate. In high school? You're talking about?
No, this was for college.
Okay.
And I've had that one a couple of times, but most of the time it's been the one. And I guess I know what nightmare I'm having tonight, by the way. Thanks a lot, John.
All right. Well, there's worse dreams to have. Let's be honest with you.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But anyway, I just thought I'd share that with you because honestly, I don't know what I normally dream about, but those two woke me up, and I was like, I'm going to have to talk about this with Jonathan. It's kind of a therapy session. We had so many therapy sessions this year on the show with all the losses. So this was a little bit different. But thank you. Send me a bill for your therapy there, sir.
Yeah, I'm sure the check will be in the mail.
All right. Well, we're wrapping up this week's show. It's been a fun ride. Jonathan, thank you so much for all that you do for Georgia Tech fans. And remind everybody that GoJackets.com is part of the Scout.com/CBS Sports Interactive Network. And it is a perfect stocking stuffer for your fellow Georgia Tech fan or spouse or friend or even enemy. Get them a subscription to GoJackets.com.
Hey, we'd love to have them. The more the merrier.
That's right. And with recruiting coming up, it's the place to go to check out everything. And also with basketball in full swing and more, it is the place to go for Georgia Tech sports information. And do we have an exact starting date for spring football?
I do not yet. They have not set the schedule for that just yet.
Spring game likely in April?
Yeah,
Friday night?
We'll see.
Okay, it's been on Friday.
They've done a mix of Friday and Saturday nights and Friday and Saturday afternoons. We'll see kind of what they decide to do this year.
Well, they hope they have fireworks either on the field or up in the sky, maybe. Right?
Yeah, so we'll see.
As long as it doesn't have a torrential thunderstorm.
Yep.
All right. Well, Jonathan, thank you again. John Ross signing off for Buffalo's Cafe Coming. Thank you to Buffaloes and for all of you for listening and watching our All Georgia Tech show. Jonathan, have a good week and
go Jackets.
Thank you very much.